Hey, this is just a quick note about our sponsor, Privado, the premier enterprise privacy platform, purpose-built to bridge the gap between privacy and engineering. Its privacy code scanning solution embeds privacy compliance and governance into the product development lifecycle and empowers privacy and security teams with unparalleled visibility of sensitive data flows and the insights to find and fix privacy vulnerabilities. You can leverage Privado's data flows, dynamic data mapping, privacy assessment automation, and real-time visibility of privacy issues. Enter the era of proactive privacy and transform privacy from business blocker to business enabler. To learn more, go to privado.ai. Hello, I am Deborah J. Farber. Welcome to the Shifting Privacy Left podcast, where we talk about embedding privacy by design and default into the engineering function to prevent privacy harms to humans and to prevent dystopia. Each week, we'll bring you unique discussions with global privacy technologists and innovators working at the bleeding edge of privacy research and emerging technologies, standards, business models, and ecosystems. On today's episode, we welcome Roy Smith, CEO and founder of PrivacyCheq, a privacy tech company that develops privacy-enhancing technologies for mobile and web. And those PETs are used by publishers and manufacturers worldwide to comply with regulations that require people to have full understanding of and control over their personal data. Roy is an engineer turned privacy tech executive. He's got over 35 years of experience bringing new technologies to market. He's also an audiophile and is an audio engineer on the side and plays guitar. He's had his finger on the pulse of the adtech space for close to a decade. And I also want to disclose to our listeners that I've been working with Roy and his company for over a year as a member of PrivacyCheq's advisory board. In this episode, we discuss the myth that cookie banners are all your company needs to deploy for compliance with modern privacy and data protection laws. We also talk about the tsunami of privacy regulation related to adtech and the web and the problem of consent fragmentation. We'll dive deeper into the W3C's new proposed Global Privacy Control Specification, or GPC, and how GPC lets users signal their desired privacy levels just by browsing the web. And lastly, Roy shares his point of view regarding web privacy and whether GPC is sufficient for signaling privacy preferences, the benefits to the ad tech industry, and some potential drawbacks. Enjoy the episode. Hi, Roy. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Why don't you give us a quick background intro and discuss a little bit about why you founded PrivacyCheq?
Okay. I'm a lifetime entrepreneur. I'm not a privacy person. I got my start writing code for the IBM PC back in 1981 when it was introduced. So I have gray hair. I've seen a lot of ups and downs in the tech biz. I started PrivacyCheq after I sold my last company in 2013 because I was aware of a law in the U.S. called COPPA, which is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. And I knew a lot about mobile games, and I knew that they were doing a lot of stuff with privacy that was going to put them in the bullseye of the FTC with the COPPA law. So we wanted to create a tool and sell it to game publishers that would make it easier for them to comply with the COPPA law, which has a lot of complexity and back and forth. You have to identify the parent. The parent has to approve what's going to happen with the kid's privacy. It's the kind of thing that game publishers absolutely do not want to do. And so I saw an opportunity to create this tool. We built that, and sadly for us, the FTC didn't really enforce COPPA, but fortunately for us, GDPR came along, and then CCPA came along, and now the entire world wants to get consent to use private data before it is used, and the tool that we built has quite a few use cases. So it's sort of like the classic startup thing where you start out trying to do A, but through the course of time, you end up doing B and end up at C.
Yeah, and then the regulatory framework has changed over time as well, or at least the appetite to by organizations to want a regulatory framework to set the rules, it seems. Do you want to unpack a little bit about what's happened, I guess, over the years that you've been in charge of PrivacyCheq? Because it's been, 7 years now?
Yeah, 7 or 8 years since 2013. So what has really happened is it's great to pass these privacy laws, and everybody who's a politician enjoys issuing press releases about how great they are. But actually enforcing the privacy laws is a whole different story. The Federal Trade Commission essentially went to sleep after COPPA was revised in 2014. Didn't really do much in the way of enforcement. We believe they did that because they were afraid of if they really went after, a Facebook or a Microsoft or a big publisher, that they would lose. Which in the world of the FTC, that would be the worst possible thing. So rather than actually pursue any enforcements, they did a few little ones here and there against companies they knew would not protest. And the same thing has happened with GDPR. It was announced in 2016 to go into force in 2018. Everybody had 2 years to get their stuff ready, including the regulators. But GDPR went into force in 2018 and nothing happened. No enforcement really happened until 2021, which is 3 years later. And we kind of saw the same thing with CCPA, which went into force in 2000. The first enforcement of CCPA that really got people's attention just happened a couple months ago with Sephora. That's part of what we're talking about today. So the general attitude has been, easy to pass privacy laws and let them sit out there and float, hard to enforce them, but eventually they are beginning to be enforced. And so we in our business kind of refer to this as a tsunami of privacy regulation that's coming ashore all over the world.
Oh, I really like that. That really helps crystallize the challenge, I think, with a great analogy for people to, wrap their heads around the concept. And so let's unpack the tsunami a little bit. There's been so much discussion over the years, ever since we've had the web, about privacy and cookies and tracking. It seems almost like there's been some adtech market misinformation. Do you have thoughts on that?
I'll say. Well, yeah. I mean, the digital ad networks, the advertising business used to be what they would call spray and pray. I buy a bunch of ads on billboards. I don't know which ads are actually working. I just know that, I'm getting enough response that it makes sense. There's a classic old statement. I know I'm wasting 50% of my ad budget. I just don't know which 50%. And digital marketing, the ability to target people and know what they're doing and track them, was an entirely new thing. And so that caused billions of dollars of investment into ad tech businesses that were tracking digital ads. Remember the old time when you would do link exchanges with people? When digital advertising first started, it was very simple. But when they realized that they could actually track people around the internet using cookies, which was never designed to do anything of the sort, that really sort of transformed the ad tech business. And we had all these middlemen who were doing essentially data mining, following people and saying, okay, you want to run an ad to 5,000 people who are thinking of buying a grass clipper? I got those people. Give me $10,000 and off we go. So it's really a big data function, but they're using advertising as the monetization method. And that has been all over the world. Advertising has been all over the world as the internet has sort of grown and taken over everything. And until this regulation happened, it was a completely Wild West scenario. It was whatever you wanted to do. If you could figure out a way to track somebody, go for it. There was no regulation stopping you. So it was bound to come to an end, and it just has taken a while for that to happen. But people are, we all had that scenario where you go to a website, you're looking, I want to buy a weed whacker, and for the next couple of weeks, all you see are ads for weed whackers because you did a search for weed whacker on a particular site. That stuff is creeping people out. And so it was only a matter of time until that sort of flowed through and the regulators started to say, hey, this is bad. This isn't good. It's surveillance capitalism, I believe, was the term that was applied to this. And so we're viewing now the global response to that. Everybody, all these countries are making their version of GDPR. GDPR was definitely the bellwether. When that passed in 2016, we were very surprised, but we were very happy. And so all over the world, countries are passing their version of GDPR, which generally have the same attitudes, which is you can't just take people's data without telling them. You have to explain to them and get their permission or give them an opt-out. All these regulations really have very similar aspects. So it's the pendulum response to the industry being in this Wild West phase in 2010, where everything was tracked and nobody had knowledge of why they were being tracked. And now the pendulum is swinging back.
That is a great overview, I think, of kind of what's gone on over the last, decade or two. And I guess to follow up, did the adtech GDPR, like cookie myth, distort the way that people perceive what was required for operational compliance? Because my understanding is even cookies are part of the E-Privacy Act in the EU, not even a big part of GDPR, right? GDPR is about, can you legally process that data? But it's not, all the rules around, web interaction seem to be under e-privacy.
Yeah, the guys in the ad business are nothing if not resourceful. There was a initiative in 2009 to produce a signal within a browser that would tell people, do not track me. And that was an attempt by some industry people to, in essence, put sort of a global thing that somebody could, if they were running on this browser, they could say, hey, when I'm using this browser, don't track me. I don't want to be tracked. And the ad guys recognized that this would be the end of their free surveillance system. And because there was no regulatory support for it, they were able to convince people, oh, this will hurt things. It's going to complex. It's hard. It's bad. And eventually, one by one, they convinced the browser manufacturers not to support it. And so it sort of died a horrible death. About the cookie myth, here's my little diatribe on that. The ad guys, when they saw GDPR, realized that once again, there was something on the coming up that was going to step on their air hose. And they probably realized that since GDPR had already been passed, there was no way they were going to get it turned away. So they looked at what they would have to do in order to keep selling ads. And they came up with this idea, okay, well, we're going to have this thing where we get people's permission to drop cookies and track them. And so they came up with the Transparency and Consent Framework, TCF, as we call it. But part of their program really was to sell all of the website owners that all you need to do to comply with GDPR is just put this little cookie banner in and you're done. This is just, this way you can keep selling ads, you can keep your revenues going, and you're fully compliant with GDPR. It's everything you need to do. Just buy this thing, or it's open source. You can get it for, $50 a month or whatever, and you'll be able to run ads and it'll be great. And of course, all of the publishers who were in the European Union or had a footprint there, they wanted to hear a story that said, oh, this ugly GDPR thing, this is an easy way for us to get away from it or not have to deal with it. Yes, please, I'll take it. So you had a willing audience that wanted to believe, and you had a cynical performance artist that wanted to deceive. And that was really what they successfully did, telling everybody that a cookie banner was what you needed to comply with GDPR. And the fact of the matter is, the cookie itself is really not discussed in GDPR. As you say, it's part of e-privacy. But secondly, even if it worked perfectly, which it does not, even if it worked perfectly, a company that has just cookie banners would only be compliant with GDPR if the only way they gathered data was through web pages. And no modern company only gathers data through web pages. I mean, lots of companies have mobile apps. Many of them gather information through email, telemarketing. They have IoT devices that maybe capture information. They probably have physical locations where they are gathering information like facial recognition or even just video surveillance. So the notion that a cookie banner is going to give you compliance with GDPR is what I call the myth, the cookie banner myth. And it was propagated by the ad world, and many enterprises bought it.
Indeed. I mean, this is definitely something I've been seeing for years. It's almost one of the reasons I've avoided doing much in the ad space since, this attempt at self-regulating that is obviously disingenuous. So the EU ad industry had a guidance, right? Didn't they have a tool that they said, this is the way for anybody who's a member of ours to...
Yes, that's what the Transparency and Consent Framework was. They created an open sourced a tool which was called the TCF. And if you were in the ad business, you were encouraged to join this and get an ID number. And they came up with this comedically stupid technology scheme that would allow them to know if you had given consent for ad network A to look at your cookies, but not ad network B. And it was a system called the Daisy Bit. And anybody who has gone to a computer school or done basic, computer science would look at this and laugh at how ridiculously basic it is. But that was their solution. And that was what they sold. Nobody who's in the publishing business really cared how it worked or how stupid it was. They were being sold, hey, just buy this for $500 a month, put it on your website, and you'll be compliant with GDPR. So the tool itself was, for anybody like us who looked at it from a technical standpoint, the day it came out, we knew that it didn't really do what it was supposed to do. But it took 2.5 years before the regulators finally called them out on it, which that just happened maybe a year ago. The Belgian regulators said to the IAB, it doesn't comply. You're doing these 7 things that are not part of GDPR. And then in February, they actually formally censured them and said, you have 6 months to fix this, or otherwise we are going to start fining you 250,000 euros per month. The problem for that is that they open source this, and there are 170 companies who make cookie banner solutions that are built on top of this IAB TCF technology. So all of those people were subject to the Belgian ruling as well. So you essentially have, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's probably more than 50% of the companies that are trying to provide compliance for ad tech that were essentially told, you're out of business in 6 months, in February of 2022. So as they have done before, the IAB doubled down. They said, oh no, you, the regulator, are wrong about the law that you yourself wrote. Which you got to give them credit for having chutzpah. Yeah. But they did that, and now the case is going to the CJEU. So in essence, they kicked the can down the road. The 6-month period that they had to fix it expired in August. So here we are in November. They still haven't fixed it. We're still waiting for a ruling. I mean, this is classic, big enterprise versus government operational tactics. You just delay, deny, kick the can down the road. So that's where we are. But the future of the cookie banner system is extremely clouded, because if none of this happened, Google declared that the third-party cookies are going away. It was supposed to originally go away in 22, but they keep pushing it back because, of course, the ad industry says, oh, no, we can't possibly change this. It'll put us out of business. So they've successfully, slow walked that as well. But in the long run, third-party cookies are dying. They don't help you provide true compliance with any privacy law. It was a myth, and it's going to go away.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hello, loyal listeners. The Shifting Privacy Left podcast is seeking sponsors who want to help educate our growing community of privacy engineers. Position your brand in front of privacy engineers, architects, developers, researchers, and privacy tech buyers. Insert a 30 to 60 second ad like this one into every published episode of the podcast. This is dynamic content after all. Feature your new product, an upcoming conference, a sponsored special deal, endless opportunities. Email sponsorship@shiftingprivacyleft.com for more information on our sponsorship package. Okay, let's get back to our engaging privacy conversation. Thank you so much for that background. I think the history there is really important to unpack why it's so important that, there's a new specification. Let's unpack that a little for the audience here. According to the GPC website, again, that is https://globalprivacycontrol.org. GPC lets users signal their desired privacy just by browsing. And so what does that mean exactly? Well, a WC3 specification that provides a way to signal through an HTTP header or the DOM a person's assertion of their applicable rights to prevent the sale of their data, the sharing of their data with third parties, and the use of their data for cross-site targeted advertising. This signal, it says, is equivalent to the global privacy control that is mentioned in the regulation, the California Consumer Privacy Act, the CCPA.
The global privacy control is the resurgence of the do not track signal. It's exactly the same. It's a signal that a browser asserts that anybody with a website can check and see, is this person asserting that signal with one line of code? And if they find that signal, they then are obligated to handle data appropriately based on what the user is specifying. So it's really no different than, websites have different graphic resolutions that they respond to. If you look at a site on your phone tells the site, hey, I'm on a phone. This is going to be a small screen that's vertically oriented. But if you go on your desktop will say, hey, this is a big screen. So the website adjusts its operation based on that signal of what's the size of the screen. This is no different. It's a signal of what to do with privacy.
That makes a lot of sense. And it seems to apply here towards, again, these are the W3C works on web protocols. So there are three components here. One that's the core DOM, one that's the XML DOM, and one that's the HTML DOM. But that's pretty much what it's limited to here. And we'll unpack that a little bit. But that's the core of what this new version of Do Not Track is. And Do Not Track was pretty much never integrated into law. And back in 2009 time period was kind of considered a failure because it never went anywhere. And even when it was an optional specification, very few, if any, organizations, if anyone, ever respected that signal.
Well, most of the browser manufacturers also owned advertising businesses.
Exactly.
So it was not in their best interest for DNT to be used. That was before Brave existed and DuckDuckGo, and privacy browsers didn't exist then.
Exactly. So why was it developed, right? What problems specifically does it solve for, right, at the legal level that you need to have this standard align with? Well, you may have noticed that do not sell and object to processing links are beginning to promulgate around the web from various companies trying to comply with privacy regulations that, different state laws or even, EU law. To opt out of websites that are selling or sharing, personal information, you're going to need to click these links for every site you visit. And that can be really, really onerous, right? Just kind of like how you have to click terms of conditions or, agree to, privacy policies for most of the sites that you visit. So that gets cumbersome and can be pushed down to individuals to take responsibility each time for their privacy, right?
Well, that was really the goal of in the advertising business when they created the pop-up banners, was to make it so annoying that when you go to every website, you have to click on these stupid banners to express your do not track me. They wanted to make it so annoying that people would get fed up and say, hey, get rid of this law. This is stupid. I can't use the internet anymore.
Right.
Fortunately, this time that didn't work.
Agreed. I'm kind of shocked that it's actually gained traction, but I'm really pleasantly surprised that we're finally moving forward on an actual engineering capability that prevents the data collection if a person doesn't want to be tracked, right? Like that it's by default based on their choices. And so that's actually a great point. Like, how is it supposed to work, right? And I really want to unpack this here so that I get your opinion, because the way the specification is set up is that it separates it into two concepts: a do not sell or share interaction versus a do not sell or share preference. And they seem so similar to one another. Let's unpack them, and I want to get your thoughts on it. So a do not sell or share interaction is an interaction with a website in which the person is requesting that their data not be sold or shared with any party other than the one that they intend to interact with, or to have data used for cross-site ad targeting, except as permitted by law. And then the definition of a do not sell or share preference is when a person requests that their data not be sold or shared, for instance, by activating a GPC setting within their user agent which has its own definition as well. So
user agent is a euphemism for web browser.
Web browser. I was just going to say, yeah, your settings that are representing you as an agent of you almost, or by using tools that default to similar settings. So when set, this preference indicates or is supposed to indicate that the person expects to browse the web with a do not sell or share interaction by default. What are your thoughts on that? These two separate terms that are being used, and why were they sound so similar. So why do you think they've been defined this way?
Yeah, you're reading this from the website of the W3C, which, it's a regulatory organization and they like to write words. To me, these are both the same thing in practice. And with our software, it doesn't matter to us if the person clicked on the do not share or sell my data button, or if they came to the website with a browser that asserted the GPC. We do exactly the same thing with our software to remember the fact that they said that. And then the next time they show up, if we know who they are, if they're identified, if they're anonymous, the do not sell admonishment or their preference only lasts as long as their session. And I think that's really the difference between these two things. The interaction, although they don't explicitly say it, is for this session. So if I'm on this browser today and I press a button that says do not sell my data, I'm definitely telling you, don't sell my data that I'm giving you today. But if I haven't told you who I am and you're not dropping a cookie, tomorrow, if I come back under the same browser to the same website, it's fair game. If I set my browser to say, everywhere I go, tell anybody who wants to listen, I'm not sharing my data, then tomorrow, if I come back and I don't click on the button, I have in effect done the same thing as clicking the button. So there is a persistence and a global aspect to using the preference, which would be the GPC, that does not exist when you're using the one-by-one interaction. And that's really the lawmakers working on CCPA and CPRA. This is what they wanted to fix, is the problem that we have what's called consent fatigue, where when this first started 2 years ago, every website you go up to, here's this pop-up. Oh, we want to do cookies, blah, blah, blah. There's a giant green button that says, okay. And if you don't want to accept cookies, you had to dig down through 2 pages. Every website did that. Everybody complained. It's like, God, that's so frustrating. I can't stand it. So the regulators, in their infinite wisdom, said, well, that's a problem. Let's fix this by letting consumers express in a sort of a global way, I never want to share my data. How can we do that? And they came back to GPC.
I think that's a really good summary, that these are basically 2 ways to deliver a signal to, a back end to an organization. The first being through the link on the bottom of the page that's required by law under CCPA and other similar legislation. And that would be the interaction, that one time asking to opt out at the end, or asking to opt out or not to sell my data. I'm thinking of those as like data brokers, right? You're rarely going to a data broker's website. They're collecting data about you, but you want to be able to have that. You want to prevent them from using your personal data for sales purposes to other organizations who want to pay to understand things about you. So that's one use case, is this interaction where you go in and say, hey, stop doing that, versus you're surfing the web. You've got a browser, the browser's acting as your user agent. It has your preferences all listed in there. You go to a particular website, it respects your preferences. I think that's more of the interaction that people are typically a part of. Your preferences there, do not sell or share preferences. But this is just kind of how you how you embed the legal requirement into the specification for opting out, especially of data brokers. Okay, so why don't we take a look a little bit about the legal effects? Receiving a GPC signal may have some legal effects depending on factors like where the individual who you're collecting data about lives, what jurisdiction they're in, so where they live, of the individual sending the signal, the scope of the applicable law, as well as any separate agreements between, the recipient of the signal and the individual. So any sort of contracts that you have already agreed to share your data with organizations, then that would be part of the contract. So under CCPA, the GPC signal will be intended to communicate a do not sell request from a global privacy control for that browser or device, or if known, the consumer. And then under, for example, the Colorado Privacy Act and the Connecticut Data Privacy Act, known as CPA and CDPA, the GPC signal will be intended to communicate a request to opt out of both the sale of their personal info and the use of their personal info for targeted advertising. So it's not just online behavioral advertising, but targeted advertising. So that is actually a lot. It's all advertising, basically.
Just think of how complex what you just said is, and that's only 3 states.
Exactly.
Imagine in a couple years when we have 15 or 25 states, each of which have their own little take on this.
And I do believe that's what's going to happen. I do not think there's going to be a federal privacy law anytime soon. I've been saying that for years.
Yeah, I agree with you. DC is in gridlock.
It's gridlocked, and it has nothing to do with the actual issues of privacy. It's all about outside of privacy, like should there be a right to sue? Should it cover, government as well, or just businesses? Who has liability or who should be covered by the law? Like all of those are the things that are keeping it gridlocked in Congress. But I digress. I want to know your thoughts. Do you think GPC will work, for instance?
I think it'll work for what it's supposed to do, which is to make it easier for consumers to express their preference without having to do it every time they go to a new website. But one of my goals is to make people understand that GPC is not a panacea. And in fact, it creates some new problems, or not necessarily problems, but people will think that they are doing one thing when they put a GPC on their browser, when in fact they are not. There's a massive amount of confusion that will be created by people who think, well, I started GPC, my privacy is now protected.
So are you saying because there'd be organizations that are just not respecting the signals, or?
Let's assume that the enforcement agencies will go after them. I mean, one of the things in Bonta's press release was he was pounding the table saying, we are coming after you. It's very easy for us to test this. All we have to do is go to your website and see if you respond to GPC. Very easy to find you. We're going to come and find you. We're going to enforce that. So let's assume everybody complied with it. When I am a consumer and I don't know about privacy the way you and I do, and I learn about GPC, I think that when I put the global privacy control on, I have protected my privacy when I go on the web. So if I go on my Brave browser and I go to Colgate-Palmolive and I have my GPC signal asserted, in my mind, I just told Colgate-Palmolive to never sell my data. Did I? No. I told their website not to sell my data on their website. If I then pick up my smartphone and I have a Colgate-Palmolive app, that app has no idea that I asserted my GPC on the website 20 minutes ago. So when I pick up my smartphone and use the app, maybe the app takes a picture, maybe it knows my global positioning, my GPS signal, because it wants to send me to a store. I didn't do anything that involved that phone. All I did was tell Colgate-Palmolive, when I come on a website, don't sell my data that you get on the web. So the net effect of GPC is it's like a super cookie banner where it says for actions that are happening using this particular web browser, I assert this GPC signal and you're duty bound to not sell the data that you get through this ingestion point, which is the website. But GPC does not pertain to I walk into a store and there's video surveillance, or my face geometry is picked up when I did a KYC on a signing up for a brokerage account. The consumer will believe that by asserting GPC, they've solved a problem and life is good, when in fact, all they've done is solved a little problem, but the big privacy problem still exists. And in my opinion, that's more dangerous because consumer thinks they've protected their privacy with GPC. It's a false sense of security when in fact they've protected 15% of their privacy.
It's a false sense of privacy.
It even gets weirder because let's say you come to my website with a Brave browser, GPC is asserted, but you don't log in. So I don't know who you are. So for the period that you're interacting with my website, I don't sell your data for that session. If you come back tomorrow with a different browser or on a different device, that GPC signal may not be asserted. And now you're back to, I'm selling your data. But you thought, because you came to my website with GPC, oh, everything's fixed. So there's all kinds of these edge cases where GPC in reality differs from what the user expects. And that's what I think is dangerous, where you have a user thinking they've done the right thing to protect their privacy, and they have to protect a small part of their privacy. But what the user thinks they've done and what they have really done are very different things. We run into this a lot with, it's called consent fragmentation, where a company gathers data from people from a variety of data ingestion points. And the user, let's say they gather your email, they use SendGrid, and you say, I'm unsubscribing from SendGrid. But a different division of the company uses SurveyMonkey, and they don't know that you unsubscribed from emails from that company. So 2 weeks later, you get an email from that company that came from SurveyMonkey, and you're like, wait a minute, I unsubscribed. So the problem that's propagating this is when you have consent to do things or privacy preferences that are stored in multiple silos instead of in one central source of truth. And this gets into what we do with our software. The whole PrivacyCheq model is built that we keep users' preferences in one place where everybody inside the organization and everybody who's in the third, fourth, and fifth parties that the organization hires can find out, today, I need to send an email to Deb Farber. Do I have permission? No, she revoked permission yesterday when she was talking to this other site. So no emails for Deb Farber today. That is what really has to happen for all of these privacy preferences to be honored on an operational basis.
That makes a lot of sense. You need some sort of unifying experience. And I think this is actually a real good lesson to anyone who's listening who works in consumer preferences, works for that aspect of the organization where maybe you're building a preference center or you're building some sort of internal suppression lists and whatnot to respect privacy, is that the limitation here seems to be that while GPC is a great move forward for privacy.
Yeah, we totally applaud it. But we cautiously remind everybody that it is not a panacea and it doesn't fix many aspects of the privacy. Right.
Consumers will be under a false sense of privacy instead of security, because this is really limited just to the web and not all these other touch points. And it doesn't even cover the whole web, because as you were enumerating the different areas of data collection, I'm even thinking like, you put an event out on your web page, your showcase page or company page on LinkedIn, and you get the information about people who are going to attend your event through that, and you get the signups through that. I mean, there's all of these social media touch points and, that extend beyond the boundaries that you control as well. And so this goes real far and wide, where any signals from GPC are not going to necessarily extend to all of your touch points. So that's definitely something to think about.
That's why we often have a laugh when we see ads from our competitors saying, just add one button and you'll have full compliance with GDPR or CCPA or whatever it is. It's like, yes, I agree. That's what consumer or enterprises want. They want this all to go away. But in reality, the complexity of the amount of data that's being gathered and the complexity of the laws, I don't think it's possible for any enterprise to be 100% compliant with any of these laws, except if they don't gather any data at all. And there's no modern company that does that. The whole thing is a gradient of, am I completely non-compliant, or am I 99% compliant, or am I 70% compliant?
Well, to that point, I wasn't thinking of this before, but to that point, I do think that we are moving towards technologists thinking about how do we continue to do business in a way where we don't have to do a compliance paper chase. We avoid that by not collecting as much data or a lot of data, or having it reside locally.
Privacy by design.
Privacy by
Absolutely.
design.
Totally love the concept. And what it means is that the people who are designing these next generation systems understand that privacy is now a key data point, just like financial data. It has to be retained and kept just like financial data. That's why you don't see enterprises having 15 different general ledgers. That would be chaos. They wouldn't know who owed who, where the money came from. The privacy preferences and the data of the user itself is now just as valuable as their financial data. And it has to be built in.
Because when you design that way, you're designing on behalf of what I'll call here the end user, as opposed to exploit them and sell their data to somebody else. Right?
Right. And so there will be bad actors that don't do that, of course.
Of course. But those seem to be the trends. And so I am seeing a trend in the market where there is this attempt to collect a lot less data. It's just not going to be the norm, I don't think, for quite a while, as there needs to be a lot more market understanding by, companies about.
Well, I think as there's more and more of these breaches and where the bad guys do the ransom thing of data, I think enterprises in general are going to realize, why are we collecting all this data? It's just hanging around our neck. Do we ever do anything with this stuff that generates enough money to make it worth the risk? In general, and this will take 10 years, but I agree with you. I think enterprises are going to pare down what they collect to only the very barest minimum because of the risk.
Absolutely. What advice do you have for the engineering teams, the product teams at companies today that have to deal with, I don't want to just say web privacy, but just, have to think about incorporating a standard like this, and what's the best approach to consents and being able to reflect to your consumers that you care about privacy?
Well, too often these days, privacy people get called in way after the fact, after the new system has been designed and it collects data in a certain way and all the databases have been built. And they say, how can we make this compliant? And the changes that are required are huge. I would say if I were designing new systems these days, I would make sure that I had a privacy person, an IAPP member on my team that would at least consult on it and say, okay, yeah, you got to do this. You have to have this. You need everybody's shoe size. You need everybody for whatever you're doing. This data should be stored in a single silo, and you have to have a way so that the user can express their preferences with that easily. It's the ethos of privacy by design. It's like, have the privacy person involved in the design, not in the let's fix it 3 months later. We'll patch it. We'll use the daisy bit. This is the IAB, the laughably stupid technology that they tried to use. But figure out the best way to solve the problem that you're solving. If it touches on user data, have a privacy person part of the design. Privacy by design. That's my advice.
How do you think GPC will work with COPPA, where maybe children themselves can't make the decisions? It's their parents have to opt in on their behalf. Is there any nuance there with respecting these signals for something other than CCPA but for COPPA, for instance?
I don't think there's much interaction there between GPC and COPPA. The vast majority of COPPA exposure for companies is in apps, and GPC has no purview within apps, TikTok and, video games and so on and so forth. That's where COPPA is really an issue. I don't think there's too many websites anymore that are designed for kids because, COPPA is really, perhaps the original intent of COPPA was to just keep enterprises from doing anything to involve kids. The more interesting thing is that there's a move in DC to raise the age of COPPA from under 13 to under 18. And more interestingly, CPRA and CCPA do raise the age of what's considered an age of consent from 13 to 18. So if you're a company that has interactivity with kids under 18, which is an awful lot of companies that have social media and games, Twitch and YouTube and so on and so forth. There's a huge audience in those ages. Those kids are now under the purview of these other laws and not necessarily COPPA. So, it's a very complex world because GPC has no meaning in a mobile app. That right there is a huge issue because people think, well, I put GPC in my browser. Now I've protected my privacy. Well, you haven't protected your privacy when you're using a mobile phone. That, in my opinion, is the biggest problem with GPC, is that the user thinks they've solved their privacy when in fact they have not. And that's probably more dangerous than thinking that they have not solved their privacy issue. I keep going back to this survey that was done maybe 5 years ago by Pew Research, very respected research group, and they surveyed Americans about their privacy. And this makes me fall off my chair. 91% of Americans they surveyed felt that their privacy was out of control. And can you think of any survey that was ever done where you got a 91%, is the sky blue? 20% will say, oh, no, it's not really, it's sort of cloudy or whatever. 91% of Americans said their privacy was out of control. So if somebody says, oh, here's this GPC thing, turn that on in your browser, and now your privacy is back in control. So there's a chance that those people will then stop worrying about their privacy and think that they've solved it. And they haven't. That's, in my opinion, that's the big problem.
Right. So it sounds like there's really needed at the regulatory level, or I should say the regulatory body level, and the W3C as well, but combined with maybe like the California regulators here, to come up with to roll out a campaign that educates consumers. Challenge is it's state by state, right? So who's necessarily, unless you're in California, you might not see the educational material.
Who's going to make that campaign that says, yeah, GPC is great, but it doesn't really work? There's nobody that's going to be behind that. The governor wants to say how great a guy he is for promoting this. The W3C doesn't do advertising. The publishers aren't going to do it because they want people to think, oh, yeah, I've solved my privacy. Keep doing everything. The problem is nobody's going to put that out into the world.
I do agree that it's not obvious, or it's maybe not part of the mandate of those orgs, but there have been 12 organizations that came together, and our call, the clarion call is out there now for other organizations to join in and help iterate on this, because this is a proposed standard specification.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. This is not GPC is not a finished spec.
Right.
And yet we have the California Attorney General pounding the table and saying everybody needs to use this right now. That's pretty unusual in privacy land. Usually it's the opposite. The spec is put out there and for 2 or 3 years, nobody does anything.
Yeah, it's totally true. But I did want to get to the point that some of the companies behind this include DuckDuckGo, Brave, Consumer Reports, Washington Post, New York Times, Protocol Labs. And so there's 12 altogether. I don't have the list of all of them, but each of those companies do advertise around privacy and educate the market. So I'm hoping that they don't just say, GPC, it's the best thing since sliced bread, but go, GPC is super helpful to demonstrate your customers that you care about their privacy, but it's not a panacea. And here's where it works. And here's where they're, where it doesn't. It only works on the web. And I really hope they do that education of the market and that others choose to join in, because I do believe it's a helpful piece of the data collection and sales problem. But it, like you said, it doesn't cover everything. In fact, it only covers a small amount, just the web.
15%, 20%, something like that. Yeah. Well, I think you're more optimistic than I am. I just don't see them running ads to say that their product or their new thing is not perfect.
Yeah, I have never seen that before. Where I'm hoping that maybe even listening to this podcast, some folks will over at those companies will think about how much it will benefit them in the long term to be accurate in what GPC does and what it doesn't do.
Well, just the name of it is a misnomer.
Yeah.
It's a global privacy control. Oh, I asserted the global privacy control. I have now said I've protected my privacy. So the name of it itself.
Yeah, it should be called GPC for web, right? So maybe then someone in the app space comes up with.
Well, do not track was actually a better name, but
I agree. Do not track is exactly what it is. Do not track on the web, though.
Yeah.
Right? But it makes sense.
So we're fighting uphill against the very name of the thing.
It is a fascinating space we're in, is it not?
It is. It is.
What's
It's
old is
wild.
new again and such. It's been a pleasure having you discussing consent and web privacy and the new GPC specification. How may our listeners reach you, perhaps on Twitter or, a personal website? And then anything else you'd like to leave any words of wisdom you'd like to leave my listeners with?
I think I've put out way too many words of wisdom already, but people can reach me at our PrivacyCheq website. We have a web form there, and I'm also on LinkedIn. You can DM me there.
Thank you for joining us. Until next Tuesday, everyone, we'll be back with interesting content and another great guest. Thanks for joining us this week on Shifting Privacy Left. Make sure to visit our website, shiftingprivacyleft.com, where you can subscribe to updates so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found this episode valuable, go ahead and share it with a friend. And if you're an engineer who cares passionately about privacy, check out Privado, the developer-friendly privacy platform and sponsor of this show. To learn more, go to privado.ai. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday for a new episode. Bye for now.